Welcome to my channel EduExcel. I am Nirmala Thakur, your host, and I am presenting a book review of Revenge and Reconciliation by Mr. Rajmohan Gandhi. It was published in 1999. An original, provocative, and compelling reading of the subcontinent's history. In this remarkable study, well-known biographer Rajmohan Gandhi, underscoring the prominence in the Mahabharata of the revenge impulse, follows its trajectory in South Asian history. Side by side, he traces the role played by reconcilers up to present times, beginning with the Buddha, Mahavira, and Ashoka. Encompassing myth and historical fact, the author moves from the circumstances of Drona's death and Parshurama's slaying of the Kshatriyas to the burst of Islam in India and Akbar's success in gaining acceptance for it, the executions of Guru Arjan Dev and Guru Tegh Bahadur, and Shivaji's achievements of self-rule. His explanation of the 1947 division of India identifies the role of the 1857 rebellion in shaping Gandhi's thinking and strategy and reflects on the wounds of partition. The survey of post-independence India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, and Sri Lanka also touches upon the tragic bereavements of six of their women leaders. Incisive and finally argued, revenge and reconciliation compels us to confront historical and contemporary realities of intolerance while pointing to possible strategies of mutual accommodation in India and the rest of South Asia at the threshold of the 21st century. The writer dedicates this book to South Asia's abruptly orphaned children and violently bereaved women and men, to the memory of Iqbal Ahmed, 1933 till 99, foe of injustice, reconciler, and friend. The author raises poignant questions. Does Gita prescribe war? Does the Mahabharata constitute, as tradition upholds, a Dharma Shastra, a science of righteousness? Why did Buddhism and Jainism meet with comparative failure in India? If there are central impulses in Indian history, what are they? The other questions raised are, what are the historical truths about castes and relation among them? What does history say about Hindus, Muslims, and Sikhs and relation among them? About the impact, positive and negative, of Jinnah, Bhutto, Mujib, Pakistan's Zia, and Jia of Bangladesh, the Bandar Naiks and their rivals in Sri Lanka, of the militants in the Punjab, Kashmir, and the Northeast. Again, why were South Asians seemingly lukewarm about the 50th years of independence? The book has 411 pages. 35 pages are dedicated to notes, bibliography, and index. The 12 important chapters comprise as following. Chapter 1, Mahabharata Legacy and the Gita's Intent. Chapter 2, A Dissenting Tradition or the Second Thread. Chapter 3, The Charge of Islam, Rage, Reflection, and Coexistence. Chapter 4, Empire and Conscience, Mughals, Sikhs, and Marathas. Chapter 5, Enter Britain, Humiliation, Dazzlement, and Trust. Chapter 6, To Crush and Conciliate the Raj and the Sikhs. Chapter 7, The 1857 Trauma and its Meaning. Chapter 8, Freedom and Reconciliation, Gandhi's Last Bit. Chapter 9, Why Partition Occurred and the Wounds of 1947. Chapter 10, Two Cheerful Decades, India 1947 to 67. Chapter 11, The Unreasonable Other South Asia After Independence. Chapter 12, The New Century Strategies for Reconciliation. The study is the outcome of a recognition and an inquiry. The recognition, overdue as a century ends, is of the violence in India's past and present, and the inquiry is about the comparative strengths in India's and South Asia's history of the threads of revenge and reconciliation. Delhi and Kurukshetra. Delhi, a city which has destruction in its foundation and blood in its soil, it has seen the fall of many a glorious kingdoms and listened to the groans of birth. It is the symbol of life and death, and revenge is its nature. Kurukshetra, despite the violence it has seen, Hindu pilgrims think of Kurukshetra as Karma Kshetra, Tapakshetra, and Dharmakshetra, a blessed site for duties, austerities, and rituals. The author talks about Ashwathama. Ashwathama is revenge personification. We should mark that almost everyone in the Mahabharata is driven by revenge. The author writes, is Ashwathama dead? In several parts of the world, whether or not revenge is alive might determine whether some lives are going to be preserved or destroyed. If Ashwathama is alive and kicking, killings may any day occur between Hutus and Tutsis in Africa, or Catholics and Protestants in Ireland, or Shias and Sunnis in Pakistan, or Tamils and Sinhalese in Sri Lanka, or Jatavas in western UP, or Bhumiyars and Dalits in Bihar, to mention only a few running vendettas. Chapter 1, The Mahabharata's Legacy and the Gita's Intent. It focuses on the Mahabharata, which is seen as embodying and also constantly recharging the currents of revenge, and on interpretations of the Gita. Interesting viewpoints of different authors over the ages. Lastly, the author infers that the Mahabharata enables human beings, not Indians alone, to see the pride, revenge, and the treachery of which they are capable of. Is the theme of the epic the history of India? The second chapter starts with the injection by the Buddha of an alternative idea into the Indian bloodstream and inquires whether the clash between the ideas of the Mahabharata and the Buddha may not constitute a theoretical context for the readings of Indian history. It also views Vardhaman, Mahavir, Ashoka, Dutugemunu of Sri Lanka, and the Guptas and the Harsha. Islam's burst into destructive standard bearers. The Brahminical system was opposed in a different way. A new perspective, according to the Buddhism, was that the king had no divine rights and the throne he was able to occupy obliged him to look after his subjects. A perspective that has been termed one of the world's oldest version of the contractual theory of the state. A renouncing king may thus prove to be a reconciling king. The whole period of the Guptas, the Golden Age, and the Gita is well explained. The Hindu Buddhist and Hindu Jain struggles in South India were not necessarily peaceful. The second chapter ends with Kalahan's Rajtarangini, written in the middle of 12th century, and which talks about the destruction of images of the Buddha in Kashmir at the end of the 11th century. The Mughal rule and mm, the Christian missionaries' relationship is very well explained. Akbar was drawn to Sufi tolerance. He had deep spiritual curiosity, and no faith seemed to satisfy him fully. He sought proof of the superiority of any one faith over others. Um, Akbar escaped assassination by Muslim fanatics only because his army was a heterogeneous mixture of indigenous and foreign races and included Hindus in whom he reposed much confidence. Without Akbar, the resentment of the Hindu majority might have eventually crippled Islam's position on the subcontinent. If he had not made Islam optional or voluntary and other faiths acceptable and legitimate, a counter struggle might have eliminated Islam by force from India. Instead, such an outcome, Islam, whether orthodox, sophistic, or any other sort, has a voice today in Pakistan, Bangladesh, and Sri Lanka. A part of the credit belongs to Akbar. Akbar's attempts at accommodation, and before him the initiatives of Kabir and Guru Nanak. This chapter is divided under three heads: that is, divinization and demonization, Indianization and humanization. The divinization of the Indian kings, notwithstanding one of Alberoni's finds that some Hindu philosophers were entirely free from worshipping anything but God alone. Another was that because of the ruination at Mahmud's hands, the Hindus cherished the most inveterate aversion towards all Muslims. Al-Biruni also noted that Hindus, while seemingly resigned to their humiliation, looked upon the invaders as outcasts and, and recoiled from the touch of the impure barbarian Muslims. Indianization. The truth was that with time, some of the invaders and conquerors had become Indian, seeking a less tense relationship with the subjugated Hindus of India. They were perhaps aided by the Hindu belief cited by the Turk in Somadeva's drama in the sacred characters of a king. Bhishma states that the king is appointed by God, Vishnu, and is therefore to be obeyed. The belief enabled Brahmins and other Hindus to serve Muslims and later British rulers too. An attempt to unite with Hindus, the Sufi movement, was quite successful. But the question also arose in anxiety for unity with Hindus, would Islam lose its identity? Humanization. Rage and terror, two of the first reactions of Hindus to the Muslim onslaught, were gradually joined by soul searching. Why did the Hindus lose the battle? Soon the soul searching left the rage and terror behind, or calmed the rage and banished the fear. Reflection sparked creativity, and devotion to the rediscovered God fanned the young flame to the great and warm fires of bhakti poetry, rekindling ideals of compassion, service, and equality. The chapter traverses the 2 centuries that followed Akbar, the 17th and the 18th centuries. Two major challenges marked the period, one mounted by the Sikhs and the other by the Marathas, and also glance at a battle for the Mughal throne that affected Hindu Muslim relations. A Persian translation of a portion of the Upanishad entitled Sir-e-Akbar, The Great Secret, was sponsored and possibly even translated or edited by Dara. This initiative of Dara was destined to carry the Indian thought to the West. Early in the 19th century, a Latin version of Seri Akbar introduced the Upanishads to the Europe. In Majma-e Bahrain, Mingling of the Oceans, a Persian work written by him, Dara dissents from the ulama when he takes it for granted that Hinduism is basically monotheistic and claims that indirectly the Quran itself refers to the first heavenly book, the Upanishads. The rising of the Gurus, the Sikhs shared the unity of origin with the Hindus and the unity of goal with the Muslims, or with some of them. Sikhism could produce, for very reason, a negotiation, mediation, or reconciliation in history. The rise of Shivaji as a powerful Hindu ruler was as tolerant towards Muslim, interested in the political exercise of Maratha, consolidation and expansion, and adding to their own power. The Peshwas were not fighting a Hindu Muslim battle. Under the Peshwa, the state was Brahmanized. Chapter 5. Battle of Plassey in 1757 helped the British assume power in India and ruled for 990 years. Defeat and subjugation stung India's pride. British strength, a combination of pluck, arms, and organization, awed them. Impact was made by what came in the wake of the British Western civilization, a combination of technology, culture, and thought. There is abundant evidence that the British superiority and the Indian inferiority were basic remises with the Raj's custodians. So Hindus did not have a rich past, but Bankim felt that the way to recover it was to learn all that could be learned from the British. In Bankim's view, while the central maxim of the Western civilization was that knowledge is power, the central maxim of the Hindu civilization was that knowledge is salvation, As he saw it, the Hindus' indifference to power explained their decline. Faith in renunciation was at the root of Indian inactivity and the major cause of political dependence. 1836 to 1886 was a period when the tone was set by Ramakrishna Paramahansa for recovering confidence. The diagnosis was clear: coming more and more under the spell of the West, India rejected the ideal of renunciation and self control and began to run after worldly pleasures. This attitude with it brought the decay of the ancient system of education and training, and there arose atheism, love of imitation, and lack of self confidence. Thus, the nation lost its backbone. Swami Vivekananda's suggestion was that until good times come, Indians should concentrate on what they seemed good at, what their past had evidently prepared them for spirituality. However, Jyotibai Phule feared that early self-government for India would transfer power to high-caste Hindus who, having accepted Western education, were well positioned to take over from the British and block low-caste majorities' progress. An account of the Punjab of the 1840s and 1850s included in the study for three reasons. It enables us to pick up the thread of the Sikh story. It enlightens us about how the British won and the Indians lost, some crucial and fierce battles. Finally, it shows how a ruling power enlisted the support of a recently defeated and bitter foe. Sikh regiments played a crucial part alongside the British troops in the eventual suppression of the 1857 uprising, and in 1857 this alignment was not the only possible one. The inhabitants of Punjab, so used to disturbances, changes of regimes, and convulsions, were waiting to see which way the wind blew. In the end of the Punjabis placed their bets on the British troops. In the summer of 1857, Lawrence and his colleagues displayed a mix of toughness, promptness, reconciliation, inventiveness, and boldness. The two Anglo-Sikh wars had yielded their considerable quota of bitterness, but they also produced mutual respect for each other's thought and each other's bravery. Dalhousie's doctrine of lapse, Mangal Pandey's execution in the summer of 1857, it seemed to the sepoys that in order to remain true to their salt, they had become false to their blood. Loyalty versus religion, personal bond versus terrible fear, and were the hopeless terms in which the sepoys saw their own dilemmas. In the Mahabharata, Karna chooses Kaurava's salt over his Pandava blood, and salt binds Bhishma and Drona even when inclination draws them towards Pandavas. But Karna had powerful grudges against the Pandavas, and in remaining loyal to the Kauravas, Bhishma and Drona did not have to betray their clan or religion. The heroic tales of Kuvar Singh uh, from western Bihar and eastern UP, Beni Madhav Singh, Begum Hazrat Mahal, Maulvi Ahmadullah, Firoz Shah, Nana Sahib, Khan Bahadur Khan, Rani Lakshmi Bai, Panduranga Lais Tantia Tope find their place in this chapter. The celebrated sacking of Delhi by the Persian Nadir Shah 118 years earlier was rivaled now by the British, Sikhs, Pathans, and Gurkhas. Every house and shop was ransacked, the soldiers ferreting out all articles of value and smashing whatever they could not carry away. The beheading of Guru Tegh Bahadur and the three princes' revenge was taken by the hanging of 21 Mughal princes. For averting future rebellions, some British voices urged a tougher military control over India, and others were asked for the Christianization of Indians and the abolition of the caste. Instead of a quite different approach was adopted, one for which Canning, and several other British officials in India had argued. It was established that the East India Company was abolished and then India was now ruled directly by the British government. Victoria also, um, Queen Victoria also assured religious freedom. All shall alike enjoy the equal and impartial protection of the law. Another consequence of 1857, divide and rule became the cornerstone of British policy in India. Christians fought Christians in the American conflict. In the rebellion, although a number of Hindus and Muslims stood alongside the British, Hindus and Muslims were reportedly exhorted by the rebels to defend their faiths, while many among the British officers and soldiers thought that Britain had been charged by providences to bring Christianity to a heathen land. They would fight to preserve the ability to do so. It is their question related to religion that gave rebellion a different meaning. That slavery was the issue was not obvious to many Americans when the Civil War started. The integrity of the Union and the rights of the states seemed to be the question in the foreground. Similarly, it took time for the Britishers realized that their, their hat was in stake in India, and India was the right of the Indians to their religious beliefs. Chapter 8 talks about freedom and reconciliation, Gandhi's last bit. In 1919 to 20, after the Jallianwala and Khilafat events, Gandhi formally broke with the empire and the non-violent non-cooperation movement of 1920 to 22 was launched. Not only was the rebellion imprinted on Gandhi's mind, his life showed that unlike most of the compatriots, he faced the hard questions left by the rebellion and its aftermath. The conclusion he came up with were as follows. 1. Indians had to be reconciled with one another if they were to free themselves. Not only across religions, Hindus, Muslims, and smaller minorities, Sikhs, Christians, Jains, Parsis, and Jews, but also along caste and class. Untouchability was a great offense and blot, but caste Hindus had to be carried along in journeys of political and social reforms. Not that the independence that came in 1947 was solely attributable to the non-violent campaigns he led and in which great numbers took part. Indians believing in violence also contributed to the final outcome, as did British fatigue at the end of the Second World War. Though neither Gandhi nor anyone else succeeded in averting bloodshed at partition, his stand and initiatives in 1946 to 48 contained the cruelty that was abroad, preserved India as a home for all its residents, whether Hindu, Muslim, Sikh, Christians, or whatever, protected their equality under law and healed wounds. Gandhi strove to bring courage and succor to attackers, shame and repentance to the strong, restraint to the weak, strength to majorities, respect for the minorities' rights to all, non retaliation to the subcontinent, a summon to sanity and decency. At no stage did Gandhi prescribe an absolute or indoctrinated nonviolence. Self defense was justified by him, but he warned against revenge and against a love of violence. The pain of partition cannot be told in words. The attack on his life was also an attack on worshipping false gods. Concludes with their remarks Gandhi's vision for India and version of Hinduism and a test of his commitment to goodwill towards assailants. Gandhiji's appeal to Ambedkar I invite Dr. Ambedkar to shed his bitterness and anger and try to learn the beauties of the faith of his forefathers. Let him not curse Hinduism without making an unbiased study of it, and if it fails to sustain him in the hour of need, by all means let him forsake it. Ambedkar's reply was that the Hinduism which the Dalits formed around him was alienating. He had hoped, he said, that Gandhi would attain dictatorship in social affairs, but Gandhi had refused to strive for it. When 8 years after Gandhi's death, Ambedkar took hundreds of thousands of his people from Hinduism to Buddhism. He spoke of a word he had evidently given to Gandhi. This was that when time came, he would choose only the less harmful way for the country. By adopting Buddhism, he had ensured Ambedkar said that the conversion would not dislocate India. At the end of 1997, writer Kancha Ilahi, who refers his birth in his shepherd caste and calls himself one of the Dalit Bahujans, people and caste who form the exploited and suppressed majority, wrote, did the Congress nationalists, barring Gandhi himself, even oppose untouchability? Was not Gandhi alone in addressing untouchability within the Congress? Eli's comment, part of a review of Arun Shori's critique of Ambedkar. Perhaps it is pertinent to remind Shori that Gandhi was killed not by a Dalit or a Muslim, the wretches and the worshippers of false gods, but by a high-born Hindu. Biblio, New Delhi, November 1997. A month before independence, Gandhi candidly acknowledged Britain's role in Indian unity. The British carried on their rule in India for 150 years and also tried to develop it as a nation to some extent, succeeded also. Before them, the Mughals had made a similar effort but were less successful. Having first unified the country, it is not a very becoming thing for them to divide it. Congress's 1942 declaration in favor of self-determination made it plain that right belonged to non-Muslims as well. East Punjab and West Bengal and Punjab Sikhs could not be forced to join a Muslim homeland. The principle of non-coercion and British unwillingness to transfer power to Congress produced the 1947 partition of India. The Punjab and Bengal bodies such as Hindu Mahasabha had argued in 1937, 3 years before the League's Pakistan resolution, that Hindus and Muslims were two nations. However, the Mahasabha lacked the strength to enforce its vision of a single Hindu-controlled India. India's political air as thick with religion when Gandhi returned to India in 1915. Tilak had invoked Ganapati in the late 1890s and Aurobindo Ghosh had solicited Durga Puja thereafter. Religious metaphors flew like missiles in the skies of Bengal when, in 1905, the presidency was partitioned into Muslim majority and Hindu majority parts, and again in 1911 when Bengal was reunified. Appealing to the Raj in the name of religion, the Muslim League had secured separate electorates for Muslims in 1909. Aware that it was impossible to toss religion out of the Maidan, Gandhi sought to give a new spin to it, or rather to rectify its spin in his view. Hinduism and Islam both taught fraternity, not hate. If Indians reflected a little, they would see, as Kabir had seen 5 centuries earlier, that Ram and Rahim were one. By inviting the two together, Gandhi hoped to deflect and overcome Hindu Muslim suspicion. Not Ram and Rahim, but a failure of trust and the resultant fear and hate produced partition and its carnage. 5 decades later, mutual fears constructed the nuclear bombs of India and Pakistan. If India's 1998 bomb can be linked to Gandhi's hospitality to Ram and Rahim in 1920, presumably Russia's bomb of the 1950s should be connected to the turn of the century religious pacifist Tolstoy rather than to Stalin and his successors. France's nuclear arsenal to Joan of Arc, who claimed to hear divine voices, and America's to Lincoln, who brought God repeatedly into his Civil War discourse. Kushdeva Singh's efforts to save the humanity should be saluted. What he said to himself, love is stronger than hatred, love is far stronger than hatred, love is far stronger than hatred at any time and anywhere. It was 1,000 times better to love and die than to live and hate. Suketu Mehta, a writer, pens her views, the minds of Gurudev and Balbir Singh, and others with memories of violence and uprooting, whether as victims or attackers, are the battleground between the need to forget and the need to remember. In Jawaharlal Nehru, Prime Minister from 1947 to 1964, India possessed a leader with unusual gifts. The masses loved him for his sacrifice and courage. Students and intellectuals appreciated his ability to place Indian events in a global as well as a historical context, outline a vision for the future, and come up with inspired utterances. As India's first PM looking for a model of inspiration, writes Bhiku Parekh, Nehru seems to have chosen Ashoka, whom he had earlier described as a wise ruler, a lawgiver to his people, and a man of peace with a message for the world. Patel did not suppress his disagreements. In Patel, who controlled the party and the services, and Nehru, who enjoyed the confidence of the masses and the intelligentsia, India possessed an ideal pair at the helm until Patel's death at the end of 1950. Nehru's distinctive contribution was to provide India with a flesh and blood demonstration of democracy. Free India's first cabinet of 14, formed by Patel and Nehru in consultation with Gandhi, was a model of pluralism. It included seven from outside Congress: Ambedkar, Shyama Prasad Mukherjee from Hindu Mahasabha, Baldev Singh from Akali Dal, John Mathai from private sector, C.H. Bhabha to represent Parsis, the former Raj loyalist Shanmukhan Chetty, and Rajkumari Amrit Kaur, a Christian who had worked closely with Gandhi. Two Muslims, both from Congress, Maulana Azad and Rafi Ahmad Kidwai, and two from scheduled castes, Ambedkar and Jagjeevan Ram. A left-leaning rhetoric and some socialistic, including centralized planning, a steeply progressive income tax, and the reservation of some industries for the state sector, brought Nehru the goodwill of much of India's left, though extremist groups in Andhra, West Bengal, and Bihar pursued a militant and at times violent agenda against landlords and the government. Nehru's popularity and that of Congress extended to the Dalits, and in the early 50s it seemed that Congress did not particularly need outside help from the leaders like Ambedkar. In October 1956, Ambedkar converted to Buddhism along with hundreds of thousands of followers and declared that the conversion signified their rejection of the Hindu society. 2 months later, he died. 3 decades after his death, he became an icon for the Indian Dalits and political parties of various hues. Another trend unnoticed when it began in the early 50s was that of the backward classes. Ram Manohar Lohia started mobilizing his group. He was a sharp critic and foe of Nehru. Founded in 1885 and named the Indian National Congress, in whose representing all who lived in India, Congress underwent in Gandhi's hand a crucial transformation in the 1920s and the 1930s. Firstly, it became a broader based and more democratic with elected units in provinces, districts, towns, and villages. Secondly, it became more efficient with provincial and all India committees and a round the year national executive and working committee. Thirdly, Congress members seem to strive with varying degrees of commitment to remain in touch with the common people. A realistic Vallabhbhai Patel frequently stood upon an impulsive Jawaharlal Nehru in 1938 to 39, a Raja Gopalachari favoring another round of negotiations with the British contested, a Subhash Chandra Bose who wanted to issue an ultimatum to the Raj, a conservative Rajendra Prasad opposed in 1936, the socialism advocated by Jawaharlal Nehru or a socialist Ram Manohar Lohia argued in 1947, with the Nehru-Patel duo reconciled to partition. Moreover, there were several occasions in the 20s, 30s, and 40s when the Working Committee rejected Gandhi's recommendations. In 1939, Subhash Bose felt compelled to resign from the presidentship he had won earlier in the year. After Gandhi's death, dissent tended to diminish, and independent-minded congressmen began to feel uncomfortable. Jayaprakash Narayan, Ram Manohar Lohia, Narendra uh, Deva, and other socialists were first to leave the organization. Vallabhbhai Patel was perhaps more responsible than Nehru for their departure, which took place in 1948. But even Nehru did not press the socialists to remain in Congress. J.P. Kripalani, who had joined Gandhi in 1915 and was Congress president in 1947, left Congress shortly afterwards to lead a party of his own. Nehru was unable to retain dissent and debate in the Congress High Command, and he acquiesced in the growing identification of Congress with himself. Gandhi's daring vision. Gandhi saw a new Congress tackling illiteracy, ill health, unemployment, untouchability, and communal intolerance in every village in the land. However, Nehru, Patel, and their colleagues gave little consideration to what may be regarded as Gandhi's deathbed proposal. Nehru did not also try to reconstruct the governmental machinery inherited from the Raj. Deficiencies in the agencies of the government and the inability to reform Congress added up to a failure in reconciling India's rulers with the people, a failure that in time would have reflected in widespread disappointment with the progress of independent India. Sometimes the disappointment was expressed in violence. The Chinese attack had destroyed some of the Nehru's fondest dreams, upset his world, hurt his image, and also affected his health. Yet he sought valiantly to meet the new realities. Small in size and humble in demeanor, Lal Bahadur Shastri possessed a quiet self confidence, shrewdness, judgment, and courtesy that made him an excellent Prime Minister. His first broadcast as Prime Minister struck a statesmanlike note. For too long, India and Pakistan have been at odds with each other. We must reverse the tide. The sentiment was shared by JP, whom Nehru had included in his initiative related to Abdullah, and for whom Shastri had a deep respect for one thing. Shastri seemed to think that the chair he was occupying could and perhaps should have gone to JP. JP's belief that his talks with Ayub had gone well seemed corroborated when Pakistanis gave a warm welcome to Shastri as he stopped in Karachi in October on his return from a journey to Egypt. The man who died in Tashkent in January 1966, Lal Bahadur Shastri, though India's Prime Minister for less than 2 years, has a place in the story of reconciliation in South Asia that will not easily be erased. 20 years after freedom, the results confronted Indian democracy with two critical questions of political accommodation. One was whether Congress, so accustomed to unquestioned power, could live with strong opposition. The other was whether the myriad parties opposed to Congress could live with one another. The two questions, sharing political space with dissenters and sharing political power with allies, would nag India for the rest of the 20th century. In the first half of 1999, six of India's most influential women were nursing a common fire of memory. The father or husband had been killed, the father of Chandrika Kumartunga, the Sri Lankan premier since 1994. Her husband was gunned down by militants in 1988. The father of Sheikh Hasina, President Mujibur Rahman, was killed, Zulfikar Ali Bhutto. The father of Benazir Bhutto, Zia Rahman, the husband of Khalida Zia, was shot dead. Rajiv Gandhi, the husband of Sonia Gandhi, and the Indian Prime Minister from 1984 to 1989 and was expected to regain power, was killed in the summer of 1991. General Aung San, Burma's premier, father of Aung San Suu Kyi, was also killed. The apparently unending chain of violence in Sri Lanka and the LTT's merciless elimination of dissent seem to prove the truth of Gandhi's warning that it is the character of violence to beget more and more of itself and less freedom. In firepower, the alien authority had a decisive edge over any local group or combination of groups. The alien group could obtain the trust of all the local groups. As outsiders, they were also better able to view Sri Lanka as a whole, even if an insider was more closely acquainted with his or her part of the island. The key question the author finds that despite a long line of valiant proponents, the heterodoxy of reconciliation did not become a dominant Indian or South Asian trait. The surmise at the start of the study that Ashwatthama's demise seemed far off was confirmed, along with other impulses towards violence. Revenge was found alive and well in South Asia. The author sees that often what came in Unity's ways was a failure to recognize the individuals in this scene as the others. The others were picturized not as separate men or women, but as a category, as an undifferentiated mass of the flawed, the lowborn, or the heathen, a mass cursed with wrong ancestors, or sometimes as a mass of ogres, as members of that caste, fold, race, or country, or in recent times as those bureaucrats or politicians, rather than as persons. This blindness, the inability to see individuals as individuals, each with a unique mix of gifts and defects, emerged from our surveys as one of the South Asia's defining and disabling features. Not seeing it may be realized is the acme of rejection. Fighting a foe in order to work later with it and working with a foe you earlier fought against, these are the tricks or skills that South Asia needs to learn. The British period offered another lesson. We saw that in final analysis, Britain's conquest of power as well as India's partition occurred because from 1757 right up to 1947, some Indians trusted the British more than they trusted other Indians. At the turn of the millennium, Indian elites and the political parties ate the challenge of winning the confidence of the Indian people in all their variety. There may only be two means of doing so, paths, however, that rulers in modern South Asia have on the whole shunned: trusting the people, thereby evoking a response of trust, and becoming trustworthy, thereby earning trust. A prominent civil liberties activist in Andhra Pradesh writes, systematic and calculated violence begins with the enemy but soon turns to the agents of the enemy within and among one's friends. What they did, however, was that they used their energies and weapons, their killer instincts on brothers and allies. At times, they joined hands with an alien invader to eliminate an Indian trial. Reconciliation with brothers and neighbors would have turned swords in the direction of the invader. Cooperation of this sort or teamwork may prove more useful than the killer instinct, even in cricket. Irene Laura, a socialist, set an example by yielding her bitterness against the German for, as she put it, love of tomorrow for the sake of French and German children. She made Franco German reconciliation her life's mission. In a series of visits to Germany, she reached out to people whose destruction she had longed for. The USA, created out of a large number of races and nations, the USA roots its nationality not in ancient bloodline but in a modern experiment. The immigrants arrived with their eyes on the future, leaving in a literal sense their histories behind them. In the new country, they found space and scope they never dreamt of, as well as freedom from a pinching past. The result was an unprecedented explosion of energy and creativity. But great wounds and hurts marked the American story. Native Americans and African Americans are yet to be fully engaged in the American experiment. Recognizing these realities, some Americans have initiated honest conversations on race, responsibility, and reconciliation in their cities. Dalai Lama's approach has helped the world to be aware and sympathetic towards the Tibet cause. While demanding Tibet autonomy and self respect, the Dalai Lama insists that the Chinese are his brothers and sisters, keeps his fight nonviolent, and asks for talks with the Chinese. Also, in a concession to hard facts, he accepts that Tibet would remain linked to China. Nelson Mandela, after 27 years in prison, Nelson Mandela emerged with an astonishing freedom from rancor and with his eyes on the future. South Africa's transformation catapulting jailed Sudanese into office and sidelining white masters was preceded by patient dialogue at several levels involving Mandela and de Klerk, Mandela's African National Congress, the ANC, and de Klerk's National Party, the ANC, and the party championing Zulu's interests, Chief Buthelezis Inkatha Freedom Party, IFP, business organizations, professional bodies, trade unions, and others. TRC, or the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, that was later instituted and chaired by the Nobel laureate Archbishop Desmond Tutu, enabled many South Africans to face and admit cruelties they had perpetuated, while other South Americans could see the acknowledgement as a step of justice. Truth and reconciliation had to go together, and the one without the other would spread bitterness or be an empty gesture, was in itself a key message that Mandela, Tutu, and their associates managed to convey to South Africa and the world. In Tutu's words, if we look only to retributive justice, then we just as well as close up shop. Forgiveness in practical politics. Without forgiveness, there is no future. Importance of dialogue. Listening, acknowledgement, or acceptance. This applies to individual groups and nations. Most of there is no alternative to accepting those next to us or opposite us. This does not mean we agree with them or accept all their views. We accept their presence. Acknowledgement also needs to extend to events in the past. It is unnatural not to fight an invader, but it is silly, not patriotic or loyal, to deny an old event, a result, defeat or misdeed. Mahmud of Ghazni, Tamerlane, and Aurangzeb were destructive, even if there was more to them. Untouchability and sati were cruel customs. Babur won in Panipat 1526, Clive and Plassey in 1757. India's freedom was won in 1947 and Pakistan in 1947. Bangladesh in 71-72. Indira Gandhi lost in 1997 but won in 1980. The BJP led alliance won in 1988. Reconverting into a temple a mosque that centuries ago may have replaced a temple does not change the past, though it can unsettle the present. It is a type of controversy that even Israel also faces. David Qutb, a Palestinian historian, writes Qutb refers to the Ibrahimi Mosque. This building is known to the Jews as a Machpelah cave and the second holiest site to the Jewish people throughout the world. This site has served as a mosque only since 1267. This building was originally constructed as a site of Jewish worship built by Herod, king of Judea, 2000 years ago. Studies showed that in ancient power struggles as well as in modern electoral politics, South Asians seemed impelled more by feeling against someone than by conviction for something. A related text is are we, fighting today's war or yesterday's? Reconcilers have to suspect any we and they discourse. They manage to go beyond us and them. Captain Bali of the Rashtriya Rifles in Kupwara in Indian Kashmir articulated the doctrine of strength. The villagers will be loyal to the stronger side of us, not the militants, he said. The gun rather than the good governance was to win loyalty. Grace might descend where there are people who keep others going. Apology from the heart or an apology on demand. The most courageous and moving example in recent living of Indian history and living in it, in my view, was the apology made by the Women's Action Forum of Pakistan to the women of Bangladesh for the events of 1972 war. Closing lines. May the good spirit that quickens the rain and kindles the laughter, the eagerness and the dedication use willing women and men to reconcile South Asians, ingenious, impossible, and lovable inhabitants.